of strips of leather which are wound around in stair-step fashion, making the shape of the knot, then glued over with an adhesive, again this animal-based stuff, and then covered with applique so you don't see it anymore and you have a very easily and nicely made stick. And you can actually see the layers of leather here go around. In this case, I mean, archaeologists often find broken stuff much more interesting than complete stuff, because now we can actually see that it is made in this way, and if it was still covered with stuff, we couldn't. But a very extraordinary object, and you might all know about that, is a cuirass made of up to 6 layers of textiles, 1 thin layer of red leather, and covered with a layer of rawhide scales, up to 4,000. It looks in a fairly well-preserved state, which is deceptive. It's not very well preserved. And the layer underneath, you are looking at the back here. Yes, this is the neck piece, and the layer underneath is most likely completely rotted and melted already. There are some slight remarks by Carter and his team who suggest that. We had an opportunity before the COVID pandemic to have a look with a variety of specialists. Tom Hewlett, who is a specialist in Bronze Age armor, Salima, of course, myself and Lucy Skinner, together with the colleagues of the Grand Egyptian Museum, to have a little bit of a better look. And we sat down to really study the photography by Burton. Bless him, it's only one picture, but I think, well, for me as a leather specialist, I think it's the most important picture of the whole collection. And we were able to identify a fair number of additional details as opposed to the publication of this cuirass 20 plus years ago by Tom Hewlett in his PhD, including amazing protection of the closing system at the back. Probably these were closed with leather thongs, and small little patches of the leather layer was covering it so that it couldn't be slashed and that he would lose his cuirass while fighting. So that was quite remarkable. We have published this in the beginning of this year. You see different types of lashing depending on the orientation of the scales and the position of the scales within the cuirass. And just want to highlight one point, is that at the side of the cuirass, you need to be more flexible, of course, but if you want to sit down, then otherwise it will not be very comfortable. So instead of the layers of textile and leather, they decided to leave these out and to double crisscross the scales so that you're still strong enough to protect, but still much more flexible. And that's what you see here. These lashings were undoubtedly made of goat skin, but it needs confirmation, but on the case of parallels and so forth. And rawhide, the thickness suggests cow, which is quite usable. We also discovered in this new research that this is actually a piece sticking out to cover here the bare piece besides the neck, a true kind of neck thing. I think the English word, I looked it up, is gorget. I think that if I wouldn't have said so, that it was this neck thing that nobody would recognize. I think it's an ancient word, but anyway, it seems not to be there, but we are not sure whether it might have been underneath or fallen down or somewhere else in the tomb and not recognized, but perhaps it was just without it. But you do see it in depictions of this kind of cuirasses. So that brought us to the idea that perhaps this one is not unique. It is unique that it is preserved, but most likely they were much more common than the much heavier bronze ones. But it is just like in Cantir, where they have this leather manufacturing kind of thing. It's just not preserved. All this stuff is rotted away within a couple of months. So probably they were far more numerous. Other objects in which other types of soft animal tissues were used are bows. These composite bows again came in with the chariots, new innovation kind of thing in the weaponry, very important development. I don't go into that, I just want to add that these pieces of wood were attached with layers of horn, but also with layers of sinew. And as I already said, sinew is incredibly strong, so that makes for an incredibly strong and powerful bow. The fact that it is covered with bark is not only for decoration, but this bark has a water-resistant character, meaning, function, so that the soft fiber of the soft animal stuff doesn't get wet and starts to rot. So apparently they knew about the fragility in that respects of this animal stuff. And of course the bowstrings, which are reported to be of God. Now, I'm not an enthusiast hunter, which you might have gathered, but Tom Hewlett is, and he said, well, nowadays there seems to be a personal preference whether to use gut or sinew. That depends. So we need to confirm this. Actually, I only found out, I think 2 months ago, that the arrows actually involved animal stuff as well, because groups of arrows are composed of various parts and they are lashed together with gut. They first identified it as hide, but in an erratum later on, Carter and his team said, no, this is gut. This is quite amazing. And it was painted or decorated as well. More exotic skins were used as well. 4 out of 8 shields were closed shields, and they were covered with patches of skins. They were patchwork, so perhaps leftovers from, I don't know, perhaps the garments, the Sempri's garments or whatsoever. But anyway, these were identified as such. These were said to be cheetah or antelope, like Carter said, but Lucas identified it later as cheetah, most likely because all the hairs are gone, which might have misled Carter into this interpretation. Again, needs confirmation. There's a variety of other stuff, which I'm not going to into detail. One is nice, is a hassock. 1 out of 4 has an inner layer of leather as well. Quivers are made of, from the tomb, are made of linen. One had an inner container of leather. And I just want to mention one more thing, of which I feel very sorry for myself that it was not kept and it was in such a bad state, which is a leather glove. We know, of course, of the linen gloves, but leather gloves are, as far as I know, unknown to Egypt, except for this mentioning of it. And if I could only have seen it, and if I would only have been able to identify the material, because sheepskin is very, very suitable for this kind of garment. And actually the Nubian people, like the Sea Group people in Hierakonpolis, we are about to publish that stuff, is all this garment leather is almost exclusively made of sheepskin, because it's much softer, much flexible, much pliable. That would be very nice, but unfortunately, perhaps it was kept in the end and somewhere still in the museum, and we can find it. Just wishful thinking. Stools, of course, with leather seats. We find it in other cases as well. A variety of other stuff, which it's perhaps not very suitable to go into detail, but besides that, we have leather working tools. Now, the tools you see here, like the knife, and these are types of knives, and the chisels, you can use them for other stuff as well. And actually, there's debates all over whether they were used for this or that, but they are multifunctional for sure. The chisels actually, I will not say too much, I will spoil this because I think it's a very bright idea. They are very tiny, but I know my colleague in Munich actually uses exactly the same in terms of size and shape to make very small appliqué work. And if you remember how small this appliqué work was on the various objects, we talk about millimeters big, huh? It might be very well suited for that type of work. But iconic tool for leather work is the half-moon knife. This has already been depicted in the Old Kingdom. Leatherworkers still use this knife, primarily for cutting, but also for cleaning the skin. And we have, as yet, no idea why he would have it in his tool. Of course, we have some suggestions, but we need to bicker about it, Salim and Nick, to find out, more sensible reasons for it. So what can we conclude for this is that we can say that the leather industry was a major craft. And Christian mentioned already the enormous number of chariots, and I tried to show you a little bit how much leather was needed for a chariot. They had to produce it, so it was really big industry. And we see, and not only on the basis of the Tutankhamun stuff, but also of the Tano chariot, which we published in 2018, Salima? Yeah, I think so, yeah. The expertise of the craftsman is really apparent by using different skins for different applications, different parts of skins for whatever was needed. And you also see that in more complicated stitching, seams, and material in stitching, and the choices of material for these stitching. Again, it is all in the details, as Goethe said. To wrap things up, now you can read it here for yourself as well. The high quality, we didn't find any true signs of foreign leather. It is very unlikely that we can find any other types of skin than goat and cow, except, of course, for the exotic skins. What we also see is that there doesn't seem to be a taboo on the use of leather for whatever means. Sometimes you still read that priests or kings didn't wear any leather. Nonsense. And for the research, for me as a specialist, please, if you find leather, don't do anything with it, don't conserve it, don't put things together or whatever before a specialist, not me necessarily, would be nice, but, and I'm pretty sure that also counts for any other specialist on material culture. And I have to be quick now, huh? Okay. And I said before, I just want to mention it, I will go over my time, I'm sorry about that, but Carter's documentation is of course indispensable, but you still need, as a specialist, to see the stuff hands-on. That is absolutely necessary because of the notes were not detailed enough in many cases, and for a variety of other reasons. And that's my last slide, basically, so thanks. I want to say that a specialist can, of course, focus on objects, but then you need to know a lot about materials as well. Your object, your look to, your view to things are different. The other way around is the same. So you are faced with a problem, if you study materials, that you have to know a lot about all the objects. But researching materials and objects is a specialist thing. It took me 20 years to get at least some idea of the importance of leather and how it worked from a technological point of view. And conservators need to know especially a lot about the chemistry of the material, not necessarily so on the technology. So it's a whole different field. So nonetheless, conservators encounter comparable challenges, and especially in multi-material objects, if you have a piece of wood which is covered with leather, then you need to conserve the wood in a completely different way than a leather. So that is really important to understand. And I also would like to emphasize that neither of them are philologists. So it is not necessarily so that someone who is educated in philology and text and so on, that they therefore also know everything about the object itself. Thus, well, the bottom line is international collaboration, between brackets, as you see, is paramount. You need a specialist in order to try to get as unbiased as possible the information for an object. Thank you. Thanks for letting me talk for 2 more minutes.
Thank you for attending. Now we have a break for half an hour. We come back at 11. Thank you.
Sorry, there's no question.
No, that's fine. They know. They can always approach me. So thanks so much.